Well, the First Amendment defense is ridiculous here because it's the actions that he took. And of course, words can lead to actions. And you don't have a First Amendment right to conspire with someone to rob a bank. And you don't have a First Amendment right to say, put your hands in the air and give me the money. You don't have the right to say, invest in this oil well when you know the oil well is not producing any oil. When people have told you the oil well is completely busted, there's no oil in it, and you sell investments in the oil well to little old ladies by asking them, invest in this thing, it's great. That's not your First Amendment right. When you think about it, most crimes are committed with words. You could call them all First Amendment, from frauds to robberies, stick your hands in the air. And so this is really a ridiculous argument. And it's also not political speech because you can say anything you want to on the street corner. But it's very different when you're the president and you've been advised by your own top lawyers that they've tried everything, they've looked at everything, and there are no frauds out there that would change the election, what the special counsel calls outcome determinative. So none of these states had fraud that would have changed the result. And remember, he hadn't lost one or two. He'd lost Georgia fairly closely. He'd lost another state, I think Wisconsin, fairly closely. But he lost overwhelmingly in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and he tried to monkey with the results in those states too. And that, of course, brings us to the phony slates. Now, the phony slates might have been not been that bad if it had been made clear that, look, these are alternate slates in case we win litigation. And if we win litigation and then there's an issue of, okay, which is the slate? In other words, you won the litigation, the Biden slates are invalidated. Where are your slates? If it was absolutely clear that these were the ones who would just jump into force in that event and the documents had made it clear, but the documents actually expressed the idea that these were legitimate slates, and yet these slates had not been approved even by the Republican legislatures. They wouldn't go that far. No Republican governor in a swing state would go that far as to certify any of these slates. So when the deadline came, they just self-certified, and they did some really, suspicious things like hide in the bathroom overnight. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, they could walk out of the bathrooms in a state house and all vote that they were the slate. They did things that are obviously criminal, and that's why 16, I think, older folks actually. First age that you commit a crime is not normally 81. But this is the oldsters in Michigan who got charged criminally up there in state court with being basically a fake slate and knowing that they were signing on to be a fake slate.
By the way, just speaking to the fact that Trump will arrive about 40 minutes from now, it's funny, all these cops are there and there are all of these barriers up and everything, and there really hasn't been this big show of support for him on the part of the public. There is a pretty big crowd gathering that is pro-indictment, demonstrators who I guess we just call them pro-indictment demonstrators there on the National Mall right now. You've been so good, David Katz, at giving us a forecast on and timelines on these trials. This one will have what kind of timeline associated with it?
Well, I love all your commenters, and they're almost unstintingly flattering. And thank you very much for the feedback and all of that. I do have a few people who say it's so enlightening and so depressing to have your commentary. So I think they're going to be a little bit depressed because I don't think this case is going to get to trial before November 2024.
Wow.
And I know that that's controversial because the idea is that there's a judge who'll stay on top of it and who was appointed by Obama, in this case, in Washington, D.C. And of course, you don't have other defendants who are going to have their own schedules accommodated. And you also don't have national security documents as such. So there won't be that whole clearance level. But here's what I think the narrative is going to be. And I think it'll be in the court of public opinion. And I think it will actually end up being accepted by the judiciary. And I say this with all due respect to the Attorney General Merrick Garland, but we were always worried that the chickens were going to come home to roost, that he sat on his behind. And he did sit on his behind. And a lot of the stuff that's in this indictment, Mark, was known from January 2021 on. there's really not a lot of revelations that were unearthed by the January 6th committee. And a lot of the revelations that were unearthed by the January 6th committee, which did a fantastic job, are not in this indictment. The Chrissy Hutchinson thing, grabbing the wheel, wanting to go to the Capitol himself by Trump, even the whole insurrection, the sitting there for 3.5 hours and not tamping it down, is not in this indictment. So the argument's going to be that before the Attorney General Merrick Garland could even decide whether a special counsel was warranted in this case, whether there was criminality enough to appoint a special counsel, it took him over 2 years. And Merrick Garland's lack of diligence, a delay, is not an emergency for the defendant and for the courts. It took him 2 years to evaluate this case, and I need 1.5 years, Trump will say, in order to evaluate my defense, to bring my motions, to do all of these things. And I think that time is on the side of Trump on this one. Now, I also think he'll be the nominee, and I think he'll be defeated. And so I don't think that his ultimate strategy, which is to delay this after November like everything else, and then to pardon himself or to have an ally pardon him, or to have the Attorney General, who would be new, told not to pursue the case any further. I don't think that will ultimately be successful, but it will be like the force of gravity with which Trump and his allies will pursue that delay of this case too.
Well, I love hearing you. I hate the fact that the prediction you're making, but I love hearing you hit Garland, because I've been hitting him since the very beginning. I just cannot believe this has taken so long, and it's what really makes me lose faith in the institutions of justice. You realize how they're all in on it, I feel like. It's like, I'm not saying that Jack Smith is part of some machine and conspiracy that's in on it, but I mean the institutions of Washington, where they protect each other and they bring charges and slow walk them, and in the end they pardon. I just, it sickens me, honestly. It really does. I mean, here's a guy who was involved in a coup. Isn't that what this is, David?
Well, this is a president who refused to leave office, who preferred to have a coup and deaths at the Capitol, anything not to give up power, an utter egotist, a total narcissist. Having said that, those charges are not in there. They're really not. And, I've heard some of the commentators say, oh, it was so cleverly done and it was such a brilliant work and all this kind of stuff. And just as a legal product, yes, it was well put together. But I think one thing that's being missed in all this is that unless you charge something, you're very unlikely to be able to prove it in federal court, Mark. You're going to get the argument that it's more prejudicial than probative. And there's a rule that keeps out prejudicial evidence. So if they want to talk during the trial at all about him not tamping it down for 3.5 hours, but just sitting at the White House and reveling in it and hoping it would succeed to keep him in power when he was the loser, I think that will be excluded by the judge, and properly. I think that if they want to get into the Chrissy Hutchinson and driving over there, that will be excluded. I think the famous bombshell where he says, wait, those are my people. If they're bringing guns, it's not to do me harm. Don't make them go through the magnetometer knowing his people are bringing guns. I think that's going to all be excluded. And so to focus on this very process type crime, these 3 different conspiracies, they're confusing. I don't think that they move the needle that much. They delight the people who want to see him indicted. And I'm one of them. I think he deserves to be indicted 2 years ago. And I think he deserves to be indicted for the insurrection and for inciting it. They say the First Amendment, the Brandenburg case. To me, this is very distinguishable from the Brandenburg cases, which tend to be the lonely orator, okay, who says a lot of stupid things. And, what's the real incitement? Here, the incitement was so real. It was so concrete. The way that he had not only himself speak, but Giuliani, the way that he used the word peacefully, which was so obviously a fake out. The man who wants to create a huge conflagration, a huge assault, of course, is going to use the word peacefully. That's an old rhetorical trick, which actually is against Trump, to give an inflammatory, violent speech and to use the word peacefully once. They say on Fox and all of these right-wing channels that helps him. No, it doesn't. We all know, right? When somebody says, honestly, start listening and say, okay, what's the thought here? Let me honestly tell you how great the oil well is going to come in. Right? Hold your wallet close.
Yes, probative is a ding word. I think there were a couple other dingworms in there. That's the only one I remember. I did want to just review, though, just to underscore what you just said. You're saying prejudicial stuff will be carved out and not admitted. Probative stuff, that's why you made that distinction. Some of this stuff is prejudicial as opposed to shedding light on stuff. Isn't that's the distinction you're making, correct?
What they're saying is that without the commentators who think this was such a masterful job of drafting and how clever it's going to be in court, are relying on the fact that they're not taking the risk that Trump would be acquitted or have a hung jury on the incitement to riot or on the insurrection itself, because they think that there's this constitutional thing, they're saving some motions, they're going to get to trial sooner. No matter how they draft this indictment, Trump is going to turn into a motions machine. He will file motion after motion, everything from challenging the special counsel. He'll move for change of venue. DeSantis's latest brainstorm is it ought to be sent to West Virginia, or they are bringing jurors from hither and yon. All these ridiculous things. But it's certainly worth asking for a change of venue. I suspect that he'll want to change of venue to where he lives, try to bring it down to the Southern District of Florida. That will be denied. But it'll be motion after motion. He'll have this thing that executive privilege. He'll try to bring that up again. These people shouldn't be allowed to have testified against him at all because he had executive privilege. He's also going to argue in motions that he acted on the advice of counsel. But we all know that he had 12 or so distinguished lawyers in the White House telling him, you don't have any prospect of winning this thing. We've tried everything. I mean, Bill Barr tried to carry water for him before Barr finally said to him, you know, there's no major evidence of fraud. And then, of course, he was roundly criticized by Trump. He was basically forced out. Now he's looking for vindication. Bill Barr will never be vindicated in my eyes after what he did with the Mueller report and how he mischaracterized it. And
I made that point earlier, yeah.
Yeah, you did. Good. So, but the point is that to then go find these oddballs like Giuliani, who had no legal reputation at that point at all. I mean, let's face it, if it was the biggest decision of your legal life, okay, something that totally mattered to you, whether you're going to lose your house or not, would you go to Giuliani for his advice and follow Giuliani when 12 distinguished lawyers in that field had told you to do the opposite? So that's frivolous, really, that he relied on Sidney Powell and all that. But he'll bring all of those motions, Mark, notwithstanding.
Well, I want to talk to you, just because you mentioned that in our last couple of minutes, about these unindicted co-conspirators, Giuliani, Eastman, Powell, Clark, Chesborough, and they've now they suggested that unindicted co-conspirator number 6 is this Boris Epstein or Epstein. You know, I'm curious why no charges were brought against those people. Are those charges in the offing? Why are they named in a doc? We'd heard for a long time, well, because for a long time, I mean, through the time runs together, but somehow that they were looking for those people who are as so far unindicted to flip. What are the realities concerning the unindicted people who we all, I think, are pretty clear as to what their identities are as far as this document and the charging goes?
Just a footnote, I debated Jeffrey Clark about a month ago on Newsmax. I feel that I won the debate. And of course, they won the debate at the White House when he was about to be put in as the acting attorney general. And Jeffrey Clark was going to be vaulted from like number 6 up to number 1. And it looked like he was going to issue this opinion that there'd been a lot of fraud. And then Trump had the famous line, just issue an opinion that there's been fraud. Just send that letter that the other people at the Department of Justice won't send. And then my Republican congressman will take it from there. And then Jeffrey Clark, they told him that, you know, there's going to be riots in the street. And he said, well, that's what the Insurrection Act is for. All of that is very, very troubling. But I'm not sure that Jeffrey Clark, and I say this, I guess, because, you know, we were in the debate together. But I'm not sure that Jeffrey Clark is really guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of a crime. And I don't see any reason why Jeffrey Clark and the other ones that you named, like Giuliani and Professor Eastman, they figure there's a 50-50 chance that Trump gets back into office. Please don't be horrified, okay? But they feel that way. Why, if you had a 50-50 chance of getting a pardon and having this whole thing be behind you, would you go and inform and become the star witness against Donald Trump? None of them are going to do it. Now, the fact that Mark Meadows does not seem to be one of the 6 people described there may mean that Mark Meadows, who is, you know, he's a swampy guy. He's a Washington insider. He wants to, you know, be, you know, eating at fancy restaurants and living the good life. after Trump is long gone, yeah, he may have made his deal with the special prosecutor, and he may be getting out of this with some kind of immunity deal, Mark Meadows.
Same with Jared Kushner. I'd heard the Jared in that same kind of context that he's not mentioned, and he was clearly very close to the situation, or that was what people were saying.
Who did you say?
Jared Kushner.
Jared Kushner, the $2 billion man. Who knew? Who knew that after the royal family's advisors said, why would you invest $2 billion with this guy, right? What experience does he have? What winning track record of handling investments does he have? Why would you pick this guy? And we assumed that the Saudi prince said, do you know who his father-in-law is, you idiot?
Right, yeah.
Saudi Arabia pays cash.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's but he's not mentioned because he might have made a deal as well, or you don't think that? That seems like a bridge too far, but maybe.
I don't think that. I think that they wanted to keep, especially with all this pressure about Hunter Biden and Biden's family, I think they wanted to keep the family out of it. You can say that those political considerations don't enter it at all, but you start dragging Trump's family into it, you're just asking for that false equivalency, in my view.
I see.
Although we can talk next week if you want to. It's not a good look that the president was on 20 phone calls with his son and his son's business associates. That's just not a good look. It's nothing compared to the crimes that I believe Trump committed daily. You remember when he was in office, I was on Pat Thurston's show, and we were on 3 times a week, and people kept saying, why don't you say, you're a criminal defense attorney, why don't you stand up for a criminal target and say that Trump didn't do anything wrong? And I said, because he's good for it. Week after week, day after day, he was committing crimes in office. And then this was not the icing on the cake. This was a huge threat to democracy. Nobody should minimize. Everybody shouldn't just go, oh, wow, those things happen. Trump being Trump. Trump almost cost us our precious democracy. It was astonishing how close.
I agree. That's the point I made yesterday. They came very close to actually pulling this off. I love talking to you, and the last question I want to ask you is about lawyers. I was having this conversation this morning. Someone was saying to me, well, they have some badass lawyers at that level in the government, Jack Smith and his team. Yeah, but you know what? I know rich people have badass lawyers too, and this is a new kind of defense that they're mounting where these lawyers are actually being paid. Trump is used to stiffing lawyers. That's kind of the way he's done it and stiffed everybody along the way. But now we've talked about the bills. We've seen $40 million going into the defense fund for both Trump and other defendants who are part of that Trump world. Tell me about how the government lawyers, because you've been one of them, line up against the rich guy lawyers who are defending them. The defendants.
Oh, I think Jack Smith's team, he has a lot of excellent lawyers. And you look at someone like, Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland and I were at the same law firm. And we were very smart, and we represented very rich people. And we also wanted to work in the government because it's a great honor to stand up and say, I represent, the United States. I represent the people of this country. It sounds very old fashioned, maybe even jingoistic to some people. But it's a tremendous honor. And, Merrick Garland's family are originally immigrants like mine are. And to come to America and stand up for this country, I mean, it's a fantastic thing. And they have great lawyers. And of course, in terms of being rich people's lawyers, a lot of them stay with the government. But of course, there's a revolving door, as it's called. And a lot of people leave the government after 5 or 6 years, as I did. I was a prosecutor. I don't want to. I love being introduced as a former assistant U.S. attorney, but I spent more of my career by now as a criminal defense attorney than I did as an assistant U.S. attorney, and that's normal. Some people don't do so much criminal defense, as I do, even white-collar criminal defense. A lot of them go on to be corporate lawyers because working for the government, you get great trial experience, especially in federal court. That's almost impossible to get in a private law firm. And so it's kind of a training ground for litigators. Both civil and criminal. So he's got a great.
So if you were assigning point values to both, you'd say they come in at about the same level. Trump's defense attorneys now, who are being paid, the new ones, high-level guys, and the high-level government attorneys who are there out of pride and out of a sense of service to the country.
During the Kavanaugh hearings, I was also on a show, actually Laura Ingram's show, with John Lauro, who's one of the new attorneys. This John Lauro on this team. And he's a very, very good attorney. And I think that he'll do a good job, but he wants to get paid. And by now they know to get paid up front. They've gotten a little smarter to Trump's game. And so they don't just send a big bill at the end of the month. They demand money up front. Remember the one down in Florida, the $3 million man, he took a $3 million retainer which cleared before he signed on. And I'm sure that Lauro was paid well, and the other attorneys will be paid well, because this is the one that really matters to Trump. I mean, one thing, fool around in the courts, all the stuff that he does, the king of litigation, the doctor of delay, but Trump does not want to lose this one. And I could be wrong. He could end up being forced to trial in the spring, and he doesn't want to, at least in Washington, D.C. I don't believe down in Florida there's any chance. But in Washington, D.C., who knows? The judge may just put the pedal to the metal. I think that Trump will appeal if he has a firm trial date. I think that, who knows? Maybe the Supreme Court would even back him up on the trial delay. The people who are horrified and say, how would he ever get the votes on the Supreme Court? Well, let's see. He picked 3 of the Supreme Court justices, Alito and Thomas. Does that, 5 out of 9. How could that possibly happen? But he does go to trial. He's in it to win it, as improbable as that may be, or at least to hang it, like Manafort tried to.
Sure.
One juror who won't convict Trump.
We're out of time. Kim, did you have something quickly? Or,
just a really quick question.
Yeah.
The former president is at the courthouse where CNN is reporting he's under arrest, and that this is his 3rd arrest now that we know in 4 months. What's the procedure? Why do they have to formally arrest him? Can you talk a little bit about that before we wrap it up?
Sure. I also did want to mention that I was a law clerk in that courthouse, the 6-story courthouse right there. And my judge used to come in through that parking lot. And so I know that whole security system down there in that courthouse. And I don't think anyone's going to ever see Trump. I think they can bring him in and out. And the only thing that they'll have maybe is a court artist in the courtroom. He has to be arrested. And like I said, this is a teaching moment. You might wonder why in white collar cases, someone like Trump, who's not a flight risk at all, has to be arrested, has to be the equivalent of perp walked. And there was a lot of controversy when Giuliani used to perp walk people, especially white collar defendants. And it was a stunt. And I don't think there should be stunts like that. I don't see why you should have to be arrested. I don't see why you shouldn't be allowed to appear by Zoom or something like that. I think Trump's motive, though, is he wanted to be there. He could have appeared by Zoom. He wants to sort of that martyrdom in Washington, D.C., the deep state grabbed him, but they couldn't hold him. He had his big rally there in Washington, D.C. He's going to take it to the deep state. He wanted the theater of that.
Yeah, I mean, he plays it all. We're saying this as we waited for you, that he plays it all to his advantage. It's an amazing thing, playing the victimization, essentially, of this whole process. David, love our time together. Thank you for being here. I'll look forward to next week as well. And boy, that's a chilling prediction you heard from David Katz today. He believes this case also will not make it to trial in time to be resolved before the next election. So
that's my prediction. And our billionaire overprivileged victim, unbelievable how he plays his part.
Yeah. David Katz, thanks, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.